3 rings. Count them slowly. 1, 2, 3. 3 Super Bowl championships. 3 times standing on the biggest stage in American sports, with confetti falling from the sky. 3 times celebrating a victory that most players never experience even once. Now answer this question. How does a man win 3 Super Bowls and still get forgotten by history? How does a man who terrorized defenses for 14 seasons become invisible? How does a man wait over 30 years for the Hall of Fame to acknowledge what everyone with eyes already knew? His name is Cliff Branch, and his story is one of the greatest injustices in professional football history. They made him wait so long that he died before they gave him his due. They made him watch as lesser players walked into Canton while he sat at home wondering what he did wrong. They made him spend his final years believing the sport he sacrificed his body for had erased him from memory. This is not just a football story. This is a story about what happens when the people who control legacies decide that dominance is not enough. And by the end, you will be furious. Before the Super Bowl rings, before the Hall of Fame snubs, before the decades of disrespect, there was a boy in Houston, Texas, who could run faster than anyone had ever seen. Clifford Branch was born on August 1st, 1948. From the moment he learned to walk, it was clear that his legs were different. While other children ran, Cliff flew. His feet barely touched the ground. His stride was effortless. Speed was not something he developed. It was something he was born with. By the time he reached high school, coaches stopped trying to measure his potential. They simply watched in amazement as he destroyed every opponent who dared to line up against him. Track and field scouts took notice. This young man was not just fast for a football player, he was fast enough to compete at the highest levels of professional sprinting. Cliff attended the University of Colorado, where he became a 2-sport phenomenon. On the track, he won national championships in sprinting. On the football field, he burned defensive backs so badly that coaches had nightmares about him. His 40-yard dash time was recorded at 4.3 seconds. In an era before computerized timing, before laser precision, that number was almost mythical. Defensive backs in the NFL ran 4.5 seconds and were considered fast. Cliff Branch was running times that would be elite 50 years later. The Oakland Raiders selected him in the 4th round of the 1972 NFL Draft, and the NFL would never be the same. Cliff Branch arrived in Oakland at the perfect moment in history. The Raiders were building something special. Head coach John Madden was assembling a roster of misfits, outcasts, and dangerous men. Quarterback Ken Stabler was emerging as one of the most clutch players in football. The defense was learning to terrorize opponents, but the offense needed a weapon that could change games in a single heartbeat. Cliff Branch became that weapon. His role was simple: run as fast as humanly possible in a straight line and wait for the ball to arrive. No defender in professional football could stay with him. The fastest cornerbacks in the league would line up against Cliff with fear in their eyes. They knew what was coming, they knew they could not stop it, they could only hope that the quarterback missed his throw. But Ken Stabler did not miss.
The connection between Stabler and Branch became legendary. Kenny would drop back, wait for Cliff to blow past his defender, then launch the ball into the sky. By the time it came down, Cliff was alone in the end zone, and the scoreboard was changing. Defenses tried everything to stop him. They assigned 2 defenders to follow him. Cliff burned them both. They played ultra-deep coverage to prevent the long ball. Cliff adjusted and destroyed them on intermediate routes. They tried to jam him at the line of scrimmage. Cliff was too quick to touch. Nothing worked. By 1974, Cliff Branch was the most dangerous deep threat in professional football. He made the Pro Bowl. He led the league in receiving yards. He led the league in receiving touchdowns. And he was just getting started. Super Bowl XI arrived on January 9th, 1977. The Oakland Raiders versus the Minnesota Vikings. For years, Oakland had been the best team that could not win a championship. They had the talent, they had the toughness, they had everything except a ring. Cliff Branch was about to change that. The Vikings had a strong defense. They believed they could contain the Raiders' passing attack. They were wrong. From the opening quarter, Cliff Branch destroyed everything Minnesota tried to do. He caught a 32-yard pass that set up an early field goal. He caught a deep ball that moved the Raiders into scoring position. Every time Oakland needed a big play, number 21 delivered. But the dagger came in the third quarter. Ken Stabler dropped back and looked deep. Cliff Branch had beaten his defender by 5 yards. The ball floated through the California sky and landed softly in Cliff's hands. Touchdown. Oakland extended their lead. The final score was 32-14. Cliff Branch finished with 4 receptions for 79 yards and a touchdown. He was one of the best players on the field. The Oakland Raiders were Super Bowl champions, and Cliff Branch had his first ring. Most players would consider one Super Bowl championship the peak of their career. Cliff Branch was just warming up. The 1980 season brought new challenges. Ken Stabler was gone, traded to Houston. The Raiders had a new quarterback named Jim Plunkett, a former #1 overall pick whose career had been considered a disappointment. Nobody expected Oakland to contend for anything. Cliff Branch and Jim Plunkett proved everyone wrong. The connection between them was immediate and devastating. Plunkett had one of the strongest arms in football. Cliff had the speed to run under any throw, no matter how deep. Together, they formed a partnership that terrorized the league. Oakland went 12-4 during the regular season. They entered the playoffs as a wild-card team, meaning they would have to win on the road against the best teams in football. They won in Cleveland. They won in San Diego against the heavily favored Chargers. Super Bowl 15 awaited. The Philadelphia Eagles were the opponent. Their defense was aggressive and confident. Their fans believed destiny was on their side. Cliff Branch destroyed those beliefs in the first half. He caught a touchdown pass in the first quarter that set the tone for the entire game. His speed created openings for other receivers. His presence forced Philadelphia to change their entire defensive strategy.
By halftime, the Eagles were broken. The final score was 27-10. Cliff Branch finished with 5 receptions for 67 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was named one of the best performers in the game. The Oakland Raiders were Super Bowl champions again, and Cliff Branch had his second ring. 3 years later, the Raiders had moved to Los Angeles, but Cliff Branch had not slowed down. Super Bowl 18 against the Washington Redskins was supposed to be a close game. Washington had the best record in football. Their offense was explosive. Their defense was suffocating. None of it mattered. The Raiders demolished Washington in one of the most dominant Super Bowl performances in history. The final score was 38-9. It was not a game, it was an execution. Cliff Branch caught 6 passes for 94 yards and a touchdown. At 35 years old, he was still burning defenders half his age. The Los Angeles Raiders were Super Bowl champions, and Cliff Branch had his third ring. 3 championships in 8 seasons, 3 times standing on the podium as the best team in football, 3 times proving that his speed and skill belonged among the greatest to ever play. By every reasonable standard, Cliff Branch was a Hall of Fame player, but the voters did not see it that way. The Pro Football Hall of Fame selection process is controlled by a small group of voters. These voters decide who belongs among the immortals and who gets forgotten. They hold careers in their hands. They determine legacies with their ballots. And for over 30 years, they decided that Cliff Branch was not worthy. The rejections started after his retirement in 1985. 1990, not selected. 1995, not selected. 2000, not selected. 2010, not selected. Year after year, decade after decade, Cliff Branch watched lesser players receive the honor he deserved. Players with fewer championships,
players with worse statistics, players who never performed on the biggest stage the way he did. They all walked into Canton. Cliff Branch stayed home. The reasons given for his exclusion were insulting. Some voters claimed his statistics were not impressive enough. They pointed to his career receiving yards and said the numbers did not justify enshrinement. This argument ignores context completely. Cliff Branch played in an era when passing was not the primary offensive strategy. Teams ran the ball far more than they threw it. Receivers in the 1970s and 80s accumulated fewer yards than modern players simply because the game was different. Comparing Cliff Branch's statistics to receivers from 2015 is like comparing a soldier's kill count from World War I to a drone operator in modern warfare. The eras are fundamentally different, but the voters did not care about context. They looked at raw numbers and decided Cliff Branch was not enough. Other voters claimed he was a one-dimensional player. They said he could only run deep routes and catch long passes. This argument ignores his playoff performances completely. In Super Bowl 15, Cliff Branch caught passes of all distances. He ran intermediate routes. He made contested catches. He did everything a receiver is supposed to do. But the voters did not care about playoff performance. They found reasons to exclude him and ignored evidence that contradicted their conclusions. The years of waiting took their toll on Cliff Branch. He watched friends and teammates receive their Hall of Fame calls. He attended their induction ceremonies and celebrated their achievements. He smiled in photographs and said the right things in interviews. But inside, the rejection was eating him alive. How do you spend 14 seasons sacrificing your body for a sport and then watch that sport pretend you did not exist? How do you win 3 championships and still not be considered good enough? How do you maintain dignity when the people who control your legacy refuse to acknowledge your greatness? Cliff Branch handled it with grace publicly. Privately, the pain was immense. He deserved better. Everyone who watched him play knew he deserved better. His teammates knew, his coaches knew, the defenders he humiliated for 14 seasons knew. Only the voters refused to see it. August 3, 2019, Cliff Branch dies at his home in Bullhead City, Arizona. He was 71 years old. The cause of death was natural causes. His body, battered by 14 seasons of professional football, had finally given out. And he died without ever receiving the phone call that should have come decades earlier. He died without ever walking across that stage in Canton. He died without ever holding a gold jacket that belonged to him. He died believing that football had forgotten him. 3 years after Cliff Branch was buried, the phone call finally came. February 2022, the Pro Football Hall of Fame announced that Cliff Branch would be inducted as part of the 2022 class. 37 years after his retirement, 3 years after his death. His family accepted the news with emotions too complicated to describe. Joy that the recognition had finally arrived, fury that it took so long, grief that Cliff was not alive to experience the moment he earned. The ceremony took place in August 2022. Cliff Branch was represented by his sister, Elaine Anderson. She gave an acceptance speech on his behalf. She said the words he would have said if the voters had not made him wait until he was gone. The crowd cheered for a man who was not there. The bust was unveiled for a player who would never see it. The gold jacket was displayed for a champion who would never wear it. The parallels between Cliff Branch and Kenny Stabler are impossible to ignore. Both men were Oakland Raiders legends. Both men won championships at the highest level. Both men waited over 30 years for Hall of Fame recognition. Both men died before receiving their inductions. Both men were robbed of the moment they earned. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. The Hall of Fame voters have demonstrated repeatedly that they do not value Raiders players the way they value others. They hold grudges. They apply standards inconsistently. They punish players for wearing silver and black. Cliff Branch won 3 Super Bowls. 3. Name another receiver in NFL history with 3 Super Bowl rings who had to wait 37 years for enshrinement. You cannot, because there is none. The treatment of Cliff Branch was not just unjust, it was unprecedented. The tragedy of Cliff Branch extends beyond one man. It reveals something fundamentally broken about how football honors its greatest players. The Hall of Fame is supposed to celebrate excellence. It is supposed to immortalize the men who defined eras and elevated the sport. It is supposed to stand as an objective record of greatness. Instead, it functions as a popularity contest controlled by voters with personal biases and inconsistent standards. Cliff Branch was too fast, too dominant, and too decorated to be excluded. But they excluded him anyway. And they waited until he was dead to correct their mistake. The next time you hear someone discuss the greatest receivers in NFL history, demand that they include Cliff Branch. The next time you hear someone list Super Bowl champions, remind them of number 21. The next time you see highlights of those Raiders teams from the 70s and 80s, look for the blur racing past defensive backs who never had a chance. That blur was Cliff Branch. 3 rings, 4 Pro Bowls, 14 seasons of excellence, and a Hall of Fame that made him wait until he was in the grave. They can never undo what they did to him. They can never give back the moment they stole, but we can refuse to let them forget. Cliff Branch was one of the greatest receivers to ever play professional football, and no amount of voter negligence can ever erase that truth. He waited 37 years. He died without knowing, but his legacy is permanent now, and the voters who made him wait are the ones history will judge harshly.